But when you show films about people, that's exciting. So I think that we realized that film could just film was amazing and could be so powerful as a tool to change attitudes or to educate people. And there's so many amazing films like Anti-Giant or Stanley by Stanley, an amazing film. These are short films. Stanley by Stanley, Polish film, or Hero Brother.
So why is it so important that persons with disabilities are portrayed in film?
Well, first of all, people like film. I mean, film is one of those things, and of course, there are different kinds of film. You've got feature films, you've got documentary films, you have animation, all kinds of films, short films, long. But I think most people like to go to the movies, and it's an easy medium. We became convinced because we started using films in our raising awareness activities. And maybe when we started using films, we didn't know that the films were going to have such an impact on people. But then we started using them, and we thought, oh wow, this is amazing. Films, they touch you, they move you emotionally. Films make you think about certain issues that you might not have thought about. We saw how powerful these films were and how people reacted to them. And these were people both in the disability community. These are people outside. I mean, these are people who may be like professionals. And I think then we became convinced that we needed to use film more in our work. Of course, I don't think we were thinking necessarily about a film festival, but we surely realized how powerful film could be. Maybe it doesn't really change attitudes, but it surely makes you think about an issue differently. It's a great way to educate people about certain things. I mean, if it's a documentary film, wonderful way to educate people about different issues from all over the world. I mean, things that they hadn't thought about. And here it is. You could think about it. You could talk about it. And it's a great tool for discussing too, because we'd never just show a film. We would show a film and then talk about it. And it gives role model. I mean, you've got role models in that film. You have attitudes, issues, new technologies. I mean, think of all the things that you could see in a film. It's not like we didn't show films about new technologies. That's not as exciting. But when you show films about people using those new technologies, that's exciting. So I think that we realized that film could just film was amazing and could be so powerful as a tool to change attitudes or to educate people. And there's so many amazing films like Anti-Giant or Stanley by Stanley, an amazing film. These are short films. Stanley by Stanley, Polish film, or Hero Brother. I mean, like Stanley by Stanley is a guy who has no arms, and he meets this kid. So they introduce him to a kid who has no arms, and he is a role model for this kid. And he becomes friends with this kid, and he becomes a mentor. And it's an amazing film about sharing about how this kid, who's only 4 years old, suddenly realized that I can be independent. I can be like this guy who is doing so much, driving a car, living. He's got a wife, he's got a family. He's a great guy, and I can be like him. Or Anti-Giant, and it's a guy who is a Canadian guy who's a wheelchair user, and he's a comedian. He's an amazing comedian, and it's about his life. Or Hero Brother, and it's a Israeli film. They decided to make this film. It's you see families of people. It's a brother and sister, a brother without a disability, a sister with Down syndrome, or a brother with Down syndrome and a brother without a disability. I mean, so siblings and the experiences they have, and they go into the mountains. They go for a trip, a hike into the mountains together. It's really interesting to see how their communication and remembering their childhood and kinds of issues that they faced as kids, and siblings who have a sibling without a disability, with a disability. So that was an amazing film. But I can tell you, I mean, we've had that just all of our films are amazing.
How can we empower more people with disabilities to want to be in film, theater, and the rest of the performing arts arena in Russia?
We will continue doing screenings of the festival, of the films in Moscow and other cities. I think supporting, for example, we have a theater program as well. Film is a little harder, to help someone. I think a person needs to get an education. So I think that one of our goals is also to continually promote access to education. because that's what they should have. People with disabilities need to have the opportunity to go to film schools to get an education. I know there is a film project in Russia now. It's outside the university, but they have some funding to run a film school. And I know that they visited our film festival this year and 2 years ago. We had discussions, we had roundtables on the topic of how to help people with disabilities be more involved in the film industry, in theater, in the performing arts, and to be supported instead of having people without disabilities playing these roles, but having people with disabilities. So we've started the discussions, and we're surely nowhere near what's happening see what's happening in the UK and with the US in promoting people with disabilities instead of hiring people without disabilities, people with disabilities in these roles. I think one issue is getting people in Russia, getting filmmakers to make more films about this issue, disability issues. About heroes, or what, heroes not the good word, but the main characters, people with disabilities. But I think that what we're doing is we realize that we can't do everything, and we're trying to focus on what we're doing and do it well. So I would say continue with our film festival, but I know that at our film festival and in our rhetoric, we're always talking about the fact that people with disabilities need to be represented. They need to have a voice. They need to be involved as much as possible.
Being a US citizen and having lived in Russia for nearly 3 decades now, how is the Russian society's attitude towards people with disabilities different from the US attitude?
Now the attitudes are very similar. If you can imagine what it was like probably in the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, because people with disabilities were not very visible. Most people with disabilities in the US too were very isolated. That's what the attitudes were like here in the 90s, the 80s. The 80s, I don't even remember seeing very many people with disabilities. And as I said, we're seeing a lot of change now, and attitudes have changed immensely. I can remember employers used to always say things like, "Oh, I have the perfect job for that person." It's like, "Oh, what do you mean?" "Oh, it's perfect. It's a desk job. He doesn't have to move very much. He just, he can be at a computer and he can just be there all day as if And I said, "Well, why do you think that he doesn't want to move very much?" "Well, he's in a wheelchair." I said, "But he's probably faster than you are and more mobile than you are. You just need to make sure the office is accessible." Oh, so little things that people just have these attitudes. And I think I can't say that they changed totally, but they're definitely changing because people with disabilities they're out there, they're in the community, they're working because we're changing attitudes. Other disability groups are out there because people with disabilities are much more visible. Not only they're visible on the internet, I think the internet has helped make lots of changes, and Facebook, but you change the world by making small change. And the small change builds. So it's like little bricks. You're building this wall. It's not a wall you're building, obviously, but you're making change, but you're always reflecting on what you've done, looking at the lessons learned.